year train. And he stole from the rich and he gave to the poor. He had a hand and a heart and a brain. It was a Saturday night, the stars were shining bright. He robbed that Glendale train. And the people they did say from many miles away, it was those outlaws, Frank and Jesse James. He had a wild...
Welcome, everybody. So I'm going to just explain the format for tonight and do a little introduction, and then just people will rotate on up to the microphone here, and that'll be the evening. So, and we'll allow a lot of time for questions, and because I'm sure there'll be, got to be some. Anyway, so what we'll do is introduce, there's actually two groups here. There's the People's Park Historic District Advocacy Group, and also there are folks here from 1921 Walnut Street. And they are known as Project 1, Walnut Street, and Project 2, People's Park. And we'll explain what that means. So we'll give you some background on the lawsuits that are pending, several. The landmark application for National Historic Landmark for People's Park. A little background on the UC Regents. And then get into some background about the park, its ecosystem, its the historic and cultural legacy of the park, the historic surrounding buildings, and then we'll give 1921 Walnut a chance to talk about their actual little historic district that they're in the middle of. So just to begin, I just want to give some really kind of broad context, and I'm calling this selected timeline for UC indifference to community, historic, and cultural values. So this is not a timeline for political, because you could talk about, let's say, the loyalty oath at UC. It's not about the racial issues at UC, like the Third World Strike. It's not about gender issues, although we feel that Carol Christ kind of proves the point that a woman can rise to the level of essentially a corporate director and behave just like a man. But anyway. Anyway, so just since we're in San Francisco, I want to just give a tiny bit of background about San Francisco, because it also plays in, and there's also some lawsuits going against UC San Francisco. So in 1947, there was a redevelopment plan that was put forward for San Francisco. The following year, in 1948, there was a UC Berkeley put forward its Southside plan. If you look at these plans, and you can find them online, they look very similar. I mean, the graphics are similar. It's sort of that late 40s, early 50s graphic style. But it's the same kind of concept where you level many blocks of an urban neighborhood, and then you put up a bunch of high-rises. Yeah. So in 1966, when this was happening, and I actually saw it, it looked like a bomb dropped in the Fillmore district of San Francisco. It was, you know, the city folks called it urban renewal. But when James Baldwin came to town, he called it Negro removal, which it really was. It destroyed the culture of the Fillmore district. And then in 1967, my first act of historic preservation was to protest to a vice chancellor, because there was actually a plan to demolish South Hall on the UC campus. If anybody knows South Hall, it's the oldest, most historic building on the campus. They decided eventually against it. I don't think it was due to my work, but it happened. And then just following that, 1968, you know, houses were demolished in People's Park. And in a sense, that was akin to what happened in San Francisco. You'd have to call it activist and countercultural removal. And that's essentially what they did, because the houses, it just housed a lot of folks. And of course, back in those days, rents were cheap. And, you know, artists, musicians, students flocked to a neighborhood like that. People's Park, and as we know, in '69 was a muddy lot. Then the building of the park happened. and the whole story of the park, which is surrounding us. Then in 1982, the Clark Kerr campus was acquired by the university. This was a big controversy in Berkeley because of the fact that this campus, which they now call Clark Kerr, used to be the school for the blind and the deaf. Yeah. And in those days, before the students were removed to virtually a cow pasture in Fremont, where the school is now, you'd see these young folks all over Berkeley signing, you know, so they were, you know, negotiating this very rich urban environment, and then they were gone. Just to jump forward some decades, in 2012, talking about the Clark Kerr campus, the university managed, through sheer negligence and incompetence, to lose a mural by the famous African-American artist Sergeant Johnson that was done under the New Deal. They sold it out of their surplus warehouse, not really knowing what they were doing, for $150 plus tax. The good side of that story, not for Berkeley, but for the Huntington Museum in Southern California, is that piece of art is now there, insured for $1 million. So there you go with the art. And then now in 2020, UCSF proposed destroying another piece of work by a WPA artist, Bernard Zackheim. And they've been, of course, stymied in that effort so far. So we jump ahead to, again, also 2020. Both sides of the bay. We find that there's a woman named Jackie Safer who is head of something called Prometheus Real Estate Group. I guess you got to be a bit arrogant to name yourself after a Greek god, right? So her Helen Diller Foundation gave $500 million to UCSF, and that's the building, for a building project, and that's where the mural is located. And then they gave $300 million to a project number 1 in Berkeley, where they want to destroy 3 historic buildings, including 1921 Walnut. And 1921 Walnut is a rent-controlled building, and it turns out that Jackie Safer was one of the biggest contributors against the rent control initiative that was on the recent ballot and on ballots before that. So at this point, there are 3 lawsuits around what is known as the Long Range Development Plan Environmental Impact Report and Project 1 and 2. And then another legal filing around the Brown Act against the city of Berkeley, because the city of Berkeley put together a secret settlement agreement with the university. It's public now, but those of us that are critical of the agreement recognize it as a big sellout to the university and giving up rights that the city has for a period of 16 years. So it will affect all of us in Berkeley long after the mayor is gone, long after the chancellor is gone, and long after council members are gone, and probably most of the regents.
So my wife, Annie, said, "Why are you wasting your time on Berkeley? You'll never get anything done over there." And she gave me kind of a challenge, and I remembered Harvey's friend, Gray Brecken. So I'm going to repeat a little of my experience here. There's no freeway through the Panhandle. Nobody tore down San Bruno Mountain. The ladies saved the bay. The tramway from Glacier Point to Yosemite Valley was never built. Marancello was never built. And the airport was a good one. A friend of mine used to do windsurfing out there where the airport was. And they were going to fill 2 square miles of the bay for the airport. And he said, well, I couldn't windsurf then. So he got together with the Sierra Club, a lot of other people, and the San Francisco airport gave up. No 2 square miles filled in the bay. Later on, one of the managers of the airport called a friend of mine and said, "You saved us so much money, it would have wrecked the airport." There are more things. The developers were kept out of the Presidio. No Lucas building was built in the Presidio. The central, let's see, the garage under Washington Square. Some of these things won by one vote, not getting built. So this is a story of how easy it is to push over something like a 17-story building on People's Park, which it's already gone down to, how many stories?
12.
12 stories. Well, we're getting down there. That's my story.
From 17 to 12, yeah.
And Gray Brecken calls that Bay Area unbuilt.
Yeah.
So
These are victories, environmental and...
over and over and over and over and over. So when I told Annie this, she said, "Well, good luck."
Did they save the cable cars too?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
They were gonna tear those out.
Save the cable cars, yeah.
Cable, Frida Klissman, yeah. Frida Klissman, oh my God.
Yeah.
And my favorite is Elizabeth McClintock, who is a curator of the herbarium at the, in Golden Gate Park. Elizabeth was a horticulturalist, and she made a list of all the trees in the Panhandle. And then she went before the Board of Supervisors when the Caltrans had spent millions of dollars designing a freeway through the Panhandle. And she said, "Well, you know, I made a list of the plants and trees. Said, this tree and that tree and that." She describes it all. One vote.
One by one vote.
No freeway through the Panhandle. And by the way, one last thing. I'm so happy to see all the birds
Yeah.
and all the animals and all the trees up here on the wall that Axelrod with Harvey made a record of. So that's it.
So today, yeah, is a big day for
Yeah.
me and Harvey and Carol and Leslie and Ivar. We've all had our hard-working little hands, big hands, some of us, I guess.
And
in
Charles Wallenberg.
and Charles, yes, in writing and arguing about and rewriting and arguing some more.
Photographing,
The nomination to have People's Park registered in the National Register of Historic Places, which is about the highest you can go with a landmark. If you go any higher, you have cops walking around with Smokey the Bear hats in People's Park. You're actually a landmark, like a national park. So we started about 2.5 years ago. I called Carol and said, we got to do something. We're not getting, enough action on stopping the university. And we sat down at Okakole, and I think Leslie was with us the first time.
Leslie was there, and,
Yeah.
and Clifford Fred.
Oh, right, Clifford Fred.
Or we talked to him.
And we talked about how we were going to do it. And even before that, Carol had said to me, well, if we can show that we're serious, I have a friend named Harvey that he might come on if we look like we've got something going. And that started it. Eva and I had worked on it about a year before and done a lot of the preliminary work on writing the statement of significance.
Yeah.
Something happened that Ivar had to drop out, and I sort of got fed up because it's an incredibly bureaucratic kind of thing to write.
Yeah.
And what most of our arguments were about with the historians up in Sacramento was that they have a certain way of speaking, like preservation ease. And
Yeah.
Charles, who's a historian and writes wonderful narrative history, wrote it as a story of a period in history. And they kept saying, no, you got to say it this way. So we went through all that. Anyway, today, they made it official. We're on the website as a nomination that's going to be presented on the 29th of October on Zoom, unfortunately. And
That's okay.
they say once you get this far, once it's gone through the historians and they put you on the docket, you're in.
It's a
So that's going to be a big
good
one.
bet. Yeah,
And it might even make a difference in the lawsuit with Tom Lippy.
yeah.
Um,
Explain what that is, yeah.
Oh, the lawsuit, okay.
It's
So-
a CEQA challenge.
Tom Lippy just won the case on Upperhurst, what's called the Goldman School. Goldman, I feel like Jay Leno or something. What's called the Goldman School of Public Policy.
Yeah.
And he won representing what's called the Southside Neighborhood Consortium, which is Leslie's group and LeConte and a bunch of, I think, 6, 8, 10 different neighborhood associations.
The reality is, on that case,
Oh,
there was
It's
nobody
actually-
really
yeah.
to come forward.
Yeah.
You know, it takes
But
a
Leslie
first
came
person, a second person, just like what you were saying, one vote.
Yeah.
And on the Upperhurst case, even the neighborhood around where this huge brutalist concrete building in the midst of where the Bay Region architecture started, of the brown shingle and what we call our Bay Region style.
Maybe she should speak.
you want to come in? Get it on camera.
Okay, not really, but I'll do that. What I want to say is, and especially with you bringing up the lady about the cable car, people don't really want to get into a fight. And with the Upperhurst case, this is a thing that I think John from the Chronicle, the architect, King, King, wrote it was just an assault to what we've learned about our Bay Region style. And
Say it again. It was an insult?
well, I'm paraphrasing, but he actually put it on the front of the Bay Area section of the Chronicle with the picture of this brutalist thing next to an 1894 fraternity house, which is a beauty, which helped start the Bay Region style. And the two things together are just destroy each other. And plus it destroys a tradition that Berkeley was the vanguard of. And, but people are afraid of lawsuits. And now there's a win. And so it seems kind of, oh, yeah, I was there, but there need to be more lawsuits. So that was what I wanted to add to. And I think if we go into this People's Park with the long-range development plan, again, we're going to need to really raise considerable funds as well as sentiment for the park. The legal bill, and that's why people don't want to get involved, because the legal bills are huge. They're huge. They're staggering.
Well, so
And
is the
so-
sentiment, yeah.
And so we need to work on the sentiment. And
Leslie, could you say something about other countries and other parts of the United States that have saved buildings? Because there's a massive global movement, actually. I worked on saving Stanford buildings and stuff. It's huge, and has it arrived in Berkeley, or is it yet?
well, it has ebbs and flows, but if any of you know New York, like Joe does, you know Grand Central Station, and you know it was going to be, Penn Station was torn down, and it's an embarrassment, and it's an El Cheapo experience to go through Penn Station. And then they were going to tear down Grand Central Station, one of the great Beaux-Arts buildings of the country. And the right people got involved, like Jacqueline Kennedy And they started a group in New York called the New York Society, what is it? It doesn't matter, and they went all the way, they took the law and they went all the way to the Supreme Court and they won. And again, it's like one vote, but that's why Grand Central Station is there, because they used preservation law, which had been established, and it's become more and more a part of decision making. And I just want to add one more thing. I remember in 1985 when I was on the Berkeley Landmarks Commission, and again, it was one vote. And was it David Axelrod? I'm not sure who was.
Not David Axelrod.
It was somebody wrote the landmark application for People's Park, and believe me, it's about 5 sentences.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
But it
all we
was
did
David
back then.
Axelrod. It was
I think it was David
Axelrod.
Axelrod. And it's about 5 sentences,
Yeah.
front and back, describe and meaning, back in those days, and now when you do a landmark application, it has to be like a book.
Yeah, right.
But in those days, the room was jammed. You couldn't find a place to sit, and outside in the corridor, and it was really hot. People hate People's Park. Today somebody told me, I can't wait for those buildings to be built there. I can't wait. So, it goes to have a vision to see a park, as we've been talking about, an open space with the cultural history around it, and for a relief for students and the density of the town.
The secret challenge is the lawsuit. The lawsuit and the EIR say that the EIR was written up by the Board of Regents, the people they hired, that it was totally inadequate. And we made all kinds of comments, and that's what the lawsuit focuses on, that the comments that people like the People's Park Historic District and the People's Park Committee made before the EIR was finalized were not addressed sufficiently. In addition to that, the lawsuit says that the alternatives for the projects 1 and 2 were not explored. In general, the university has this, sue me, I'll see you in court. They think they can get away with anything. The Regents is actually its own government, so they didn't really do any justice to paying attention to what some of the serious environmental impacts are that anybody can see. They had mitigation measures that weren't fully researched. So I think we have a great lawyer, and I think we have a really good chance of prevailing against the university in that lawsuit, especially coming off a recent win. And he's familiar because in the Upperhurst lawsuit, he became familiar with the 2020 LRDP. And so he knows the trickery involved with stating things in certain ways and trying to work your way around actually trying to protect the environment. That's what it comes down to, that they really said, we'll take whatever we want in the South Side. You're not going to in any way force us to do any kind of building on the campus. This is, our Shangri-La. We need it to be this way and stay this way. That's the way we bring in, high-paying students from everywhere, including across miles of oceans. And that's the way we take, good pictures that get us lots of recognition around the world. So the other lawsuit is a lawsuit against the city of Berkeley, stating that they violated the Brown Act by entering into a secret agreement. 3 days after the Upperhurst case was won, which the city was a plaintiff in, was won on a Friday night. And that Tuesday, the city went into a secret closed-door session and started asking the attorney to draft terms for a secret agreement. And somehow we heard that that was going on, and we started raising a fuss, calling the city. At one point, I think a week later, at a meeting, I called in, and after the end of my comment, I said, and after all the stuff that you've given up in this agreement, I've heard that you're settling for $4.1 million on the services. And Jesse was like, oh, it's at least $21 million a year. And you're settling for 4.1? And Jesse says, right on the air, he says, call the city attorney. Somebody leaked that information. I'm going to sue somebody. He was talking about one of the council people. That's how scared he was. So that happened. 2 weeks later. Oh, no, actually, I think a week later, they had a press release where they divulged that there was actually an agreement made, but insisted that it didn't violate the Brown Act because the Regents hadn't signed off on it yet. Harvey's looking at me. Am I going too long? No? Okay, because I want to get to the things that I liked about working on it.
Go ahead. Because we can have questions later.
Yeah. Like I said, we've been working on the nomination for a long time. And we discovered a lot of stuff. And the things that really were important to me, because I realized that working on it, that being part of this attempt to save People's Park and the whole student protest movement that's symbolized by the park and everything that happened back then was, to me, a part of my own life. Back in New York, when we started protesting against the war, it was an awareness in me that the people that run this country, the people that run the news media, were fucking with our heads. They thought they could lie to us and, go to all kinds of countries and wreak havoc, and that they would get away with it. And to me, it was a group of younger people finally realizing that we were being lied to, and people were being, murdered, and their whole countries were being denuded by napalm, by this, corporate structure. And that's why when I got here and started working on the park, I realized it was so deep in my soul, because it was something that gave my life meaning. I put off going to medical school to go back to Mississippi after I was there in '64, because I just had to see things change. So what I discovered when I started working on the nomination was that what really started things was a group of students that originally were very straight-laced, very well-behaved. They were called Slate, and they started as a group that wanted to get students more involved, not just in things that were going on campus, but they wanted to assert, the right and the correctness of students working on issues that were part of the larger society. So they started, their ideology was against imperialism and nuclear weapons, but they also started doing real things. Mike Miller, who later became a part of the group that built the park, was part of Slate, and it was his philosophy that if you take a core issue, something that really strikes at the heart of people, in other words, something that people know is right inherently, like civil rights, and you bring that awareness to something that's going on in the community in where you're located, and get that kind of connection, that's the key to a successful campaign. And they did that. They had started working on issues where black people, then called African Americans, I guess, were not being hired, not being promoted in the hotel industry, in sororities and fraternities on campus. Black people weren't allowed. And they made it a big issue. They created sort of street theater. They worked against people that were not being treated right or hired on an equal basis in the food service industry. They did things called shop-ins against lucky supermarkets where students, I don't know how many, but enough to make a difference, would go in, fill up their shopping carts, roll up to the checkout counter, and disappear. And it created, you know, a lot of good street theater. It disrupted Lucky's a little. And eventually, in Berkeley, they got rid of Lucky's. And eventually, they made it so that even Cal women at football games didn't have to sit in the women's section. All of the good seats on the 50-yard line had been given to men. So they stood up for big things and small things, and they were tremendously successful. Their biggest success, of course, was in 1960 when they spent a lot of time. They had heard, because one of their students in Slate was called to testify against the House Committee on Un-American Activities. So they knew HUAC was coming to town. So they had months to prepare a big demonstration. They went over to the city. And at that point, like Mike Miller said, they wore their Sunday best to go to demonstrations. And there they are in their Sunday best. And the San Francisco police open up fire hoses right inside the rotunda of City Hall, and they're wiping these students with power hoses down the stairs, and the cops are dragging them through puddles of water. Well, that was the biggest mistake the police and the University of California could ever have made. It was big-time news. People like Tom Hayden flew in from, he wasn't big at then, but he still flew. He flew in from Michigan and said to the people at Slate, "How did you do this? I want to learn how to do this." National headlines and, you know, real good media coverage was something that he could see was important. They were meeting, and eventually he did use a lot of the techniques that the Slate people told him about. So that was important to me, that Slate, which was actually a really important building block for the free speech movement, it probably wouldn't have happened without those beginning actions, was based on civil rights, which I had been such an important part in my life, going to Mississippi. So that was important. And of course, the other big thing was that the free speech movement, once it erupted, once the university realized that they could chase the people off of that little strip, there's 27 feet of concrete between the actual street of Bancroft Way and what people thought was the beginning of university property that had been taken by students to recruit people to do these anti-discrimination actions. Well, when the university decided they wanted to crack down on them, they all of a sudden announced that strip of land is not public property, it's ours, and they forbid them to meet there anymore. And that's when things broke loose. Jack Weinstein, is his name Weinstein or Weinstein? Weinberg. I should do some Hail Mary for my Jewish background. He took his chair and he went right up to Sproul Plaza and did a kind of in-your-face action against, I think it was a vice chancellor named Stone. And from there on, the police car, Weinberg in the car, Mario Savio on top of it, thousands of people around them in Sproul Plaza. And that's what changed the whole tenor of the student protest movement. There were no more bow ties and good shirts and Sunday clothes. It was counterculture, drugs, rock and roll, and
Tie-dye.
a lot of anger, and a lot of righteous anger, and a lot of we're not going to take it anymore. And that's what People's Park is, and it's a totally important, not just a symbol, but a trophy of what people did in their commitment to standing up for things that they believed was right. And nowadays, you know, the university, of course they can't see that because, you know, they're part of this, you know, corporate structure that just has to keep on building, has to keep on, you know, getting bigger and bigger, and can't see, you know, can't even conceive of changing course. And what is part of that blindness these days is that here we have a beautiful park that's open, that's got all of these trees and animals that Zach was referring to, and in the midst of, you know, imminent global catastrophe, the university can't even pay any attention to that and find some way of turning the park over to people that really can be good stewards for it. So it's got so many important aspects, and we're going to keep it, and it's going to be with us forever.
It's so ironic that we're suing the Regents because they sued me. 30 years ago, I was sued for $250,000 because supposedly I was the key leader of a violent conspiracy. And what I really was a whole lot like what I am now. I knew a bunch of people who wanted to resist an effort to turn the park into a sports facility. And we thought, well, that's dumb, you know. And we resisted that. And using a SLAP suit, SLAP is an acronym for Strategic Lawsuit Against Public Participation. And we were all sued in an effort to frighten us away from speaking out against what was just a development proposal that we eventually succeeded in destroying. But in the meantime, it cost a lot of money, and it really had an impact on me as a musician. I'm a local musician, I'm an artist, a cartoonist. People thought, that was my alma mater, calling me a violent, you know, conspiracist or something. Anyhow, the UC Regents are appointed, usually, I mean, this sounds like I'm exaggerating, but they're appointed because they give a lot of money to the governor's electoral campaign. And they usually have that money because they started a tech startup, or they have a successful and lucrative business. They are, and we've got a copy of UC Regents Are Not Your Friends here that was made by a group of students on campus. And the idea is just to show you, this is all factual information, who they are. And who they are is wealthy people who don't necessarily know a thing about universities or education. They don't necessarily know a thing about even the planning of a particular town in the UC system. They are just so flattered to be there that they generally give the University of California anything they want, including, one of my favorites really is, Natalie and Paul, the destruction of a rent-controlled, landmarked building that is so beautiful. I mean, it's sort of an understated building, but it's very conservative of land use in the sense that it has several stories. It's everything you would want to see in housing if you cared about housing, not just students, but workers and people who live in Berkeley. And they want to destroy it and monetize it. So that's who the Regents are to me. They are a kind of disinterested group of people sitting, preening under the spotlight of a power that they don't deserve. And 30 years ago when I was sued with David Nadell, who owned Ashkenaz, and one of the things we did was start a movement called Democratize the Regents. We believe that the Regents system, I don't know, might be workable if these people were elected and they had to have platforms that reflected our values so that we could choose them. We could choose people who reflected community concerns, who reflected a knowledge about how an educational system at its best could serve the communities of California. This is important, and we're not putting that important concern in the hands of people who are really giving it the attention that it deserves. So I hope I've answered your question. I just want to add a couple more things, though. Yay. And I hope you'll talk to Paul and Natalie here, who are from this building, which only a year ago, our mayor, Jesse Adeguin, was trying to get a photo op in front of with you and saying, oh, we can't let this building go. And then just about a week ago, boy, did he let it go. Boy, did he just drop it as a concern. And I just asked them the question I've been dying to ask them. Has he given you a call? Has he apologized? No, absolutely. This complete 180-degree flip has gone unremarked by the mayor of the city of Berkeley. So if you feel like making a phone call soon, call up the mayor's office of the city of Berkeley and say, what happened? Isn't this the kind of housing you want? Because it sure is the kind of housing the city of Berkeley wants. Anyhow, I got together with, these are my heroes, the people with whom I've been organizing for a couple of years now. Because I have friends who are dead now behind the street conflict over People's Park. I lost a lot by being branded by my alma mater as the leader of a violent conspiracy. I'm a musician, you know, they look twice about hiring you when that happens, no matter what you're doing. I'm just a working class musician. But I also miss my friends very, very much. I am powerfully upset that we are this close to having another street conflict that may take lives, it certainly will cost business. It will disrupt students who are focused on a project that they care so much about, that they may have put years into creating. I'm that kind of person. I work on creative projects and put everything I have into it. We should not have to be brought to this dangerous precipice of the kind of conflict in the streets where people like me, full of passion, are what? Up against cops who have been trained in the use of military weapons and are dying to pull that trigger on people like us. We don't know anything about battling in the streets, but people are that frustrated. And I just don't want to see that happen. So one of my favorite people, Leslie over here, has enlisted me in some of the struggles to protect landmarks. And we started talking about, well, to me, one of the most powerful things about our struggle is that, first of all, People's Park is a park. And a park is one of the most bipartisan supported things of all in the nation. If you send $50 to your state parks, you will start hearing from Republicans because they think you must be Republican. That's how much they care about parks. It's true. Parks are beloved by everyone. They are trees, they're grass, they're natural settings, sunsets, sunrises. And the other thing is landmarks. Right here, and this is a handmade map by Leslie, right in the middle here. This is People's Park, right in the middle, and it's surrounded by all, and these aren't even all of them, these extraordinary architectural gems, each one of which tells a brilliant story about Berkeley history. And Harvey's is one of the people who has written literature about this, articles about this. Leslie works with the Bay Architectural Heritage Association, Berkeley Architectural Heritage Association, Park, which has a brilliant website where you can learn about each and every one. But my thought was, between People's Park being a landmark and it's being natural open space with at least 17 species of birds that you can see on any given day, we have a chance to just make a case for People's Park being a park. But I just want to finish by saying, I'm also a musician. And over the years, I've played at People's Park and got a chance to get to know Joy of Cooking and met Robert Hunter and heard him play. He's the main songwriter for the Grateful Dead, in case you didn't know. He only died about 2 years ago. The musicians that have come through that venue, to me, every time I look at the park, I think about those concerts, how it changed lives. It certainly changed me as a musician to have this cultural resource, which is what the state calls it. Right, that was my only backyard when I lived as a UC Berkeley student at Davidson Hall, which is one of those ugly high-rises that you share with somebody who doesn't like the music you play in the first place. So you got to go outside somewhere and play guitar. And I would just take my guitar down to People's Park, and somebody would always walk up and say, "Oh, hey, let's play." And you'd learn, and they'd learn, and you'd learn together, you'd work together, and I can't tell you that it changed my way of thinking about culture to just constantly be meeting with people who wanted to collaborate with me. And I usually would say, yes, let's do that thing, let's try that thing. I have had the glory of co-writing songs, co-making plays, creating street theater, and ending up on Twitwit Radio for 3 years as their main songwriter. Many, many things came out of, I don't think it's the park itself so much as the fact that in its beginning, and I came there in 1972, it was like a night and day maker fair, where if you were creative, I mean, there were things about it that were challenging. But I'll tell you, the creative people I met there and the creative projects that I did there, I feel like I owe this place and its cultural resource history to try to stand up for it and do what I can to protect it. That's it.
I want to encourage everyone to, spend some time, if you haven't already, looking at what's up on the walls, because this represents a lot of creativity that's here and documentation of what's happened in the park. Also, we've got a sign up over here. We have this open letter that many people have signed on to, over 120 people. So if you want to sign up for that, sign up on the pad on the left. It's marked. If you just want to get information from us, sign up and put your email down on the other pad, or you can do both. I just want to finish up by noting, well, first, Carol mentioned the ecosystem of the park. But I want to remind people that it's not only 17 species, but you got top of the food chain. You've got a red-tailed hawk that lives in the park.
The birds up there, too.
Yeah, we got birds here. So Joe mentioned the fact that the park, the campus itself, the Regents want to lay off of it. But part of the reason is that the university, it's this whole monetization thing that Carol's talking about. And, there's a big push on campus. I went to UC many years ago, and I was in the humanities. I was an English major, and later public health, social service. But what the thrust of the university seems to be in recent years is moving more towards this, which is the rage in K through 12 education: science, technology, engineering, and math. And it's very much supported by corporate donors. And the de-emphasizing of humanities is very palpable. The library budget, I get fundraising letters from the library. Their budget has been decreasing year after year after year. This is supposed to be a great university. So you see the UC teaming up with like BP, British Petroleum. There's a building that is right across the street where 1921 Walnut is. Disreputable, donors like Prometheus Real Estate. And then you've got the UC Regents that are, you know, every single region has corporate ties, and some with some pretty despicable ones. And we've seen this progression on the campus. I went to the School of Public Health. That building was demolished. Zach actually was a carpenter working on that building a long time ago. They demolished that building, and it was replaced by a biomedical building named after a big donor. Tolman Hall was demolished, earthquake unsafe, yes, but that was the School of Psychology and the School of Education. Removed from the campus, and what they're talking about putting in that spot, they have a $252 million anonymous donation, and they're calling it the Data Hub. So again, this is not the humanities. Data Hub. It's some kind of tech something. Data Hub. Yeah. And then, and then what happened to the School of Public Health and the School of Education and Psychology, it was moved to a building called Berkeley West, Berkeley Way West. And I visited the building when it came up, and there were these two big open areas on street level. And I thought naively, this is going to be the two libraries, because each building, Tolman Hall, Warren Hall for the School of Public Health, they each had a library.
Where did they go?
Where did they go? They disappeared. What the university did was monetize that space. It's commercial space. It's a Japanese noodle chain on one side, and I guess it was going to be a Noah's Bagels, but they've been closed, so it's rental space. And then 3 floors of the building are also commercial space. So you see this direction of the university, going in a corporate direction, monetizing to try to raise money. And so I'm suggesting a different kind of STEM. It won't be the science, technology, engineering, and math. I think it should be sensitivity to trees and ecosystem maintenance, starting with People's Park.
Raw about having finished the National Register application, it doesn't mean it's approved. It has to go before a body just like the Regents. They're all political. It's the State Historic Resource Commission. And they can be just as easily called by their friends to not vote for People's Park. It's not a given it's going to be on the National Register. In fact, if the university is on its lookout or its smarts, which it wants to be, they will treat that board just like the Regents. And the People's Park application will be denied. And so if any of you give an email or want to help organize, another thing, Zoom meetings for public agencies do not necessarily make the public agencies accountable. A Zoom meeting is a great way to hide behind the presence of the public right there in the room with you and watching you vote. At least we found that in the Berkeley City Council. So let's keep track of that October whatever meeting. 29th. I've been in person to Landmarks Commission meetings, and I've seen things fail that should have been designated. And this is a real case where none of those commissioners care about, they could be just like the lady I talked to today who said, I hope something's built there fast. And a lot of middle-class, entitled people who get appointed to state commissions have only heard about People's Park as something that should be built on. Yeah.
This is that, what you're saying is exactly what I was worried about, because, yeah, the decision makers, I mean, UC has so much power, and so we need to be on top of our game with, like, who are we supposed to be sending these?
Exactly. Let me please.
Yeah, okay.
You can make public comments on the site even before the meeting.
So what you can do, this is the State Historic Preservation Office. The acronym is SHPO, if that helps you remember it. So you can go to the SHPO website, and you see tabs on the top of the website, and there's one for commission over to the right. So you go to that tab, and within that, there's going to be some choices you can make and where you can go in that page. And one of them is pending nominations. So you can actually look at a brief summary of our nomination, and you can actually look at the actual thing that we wrote. And I believe somewhere in the website you can make comments, because I was told that you can make comments. But you may have to look at the website to figure out.
Sign up or something so we can communicate.
Well, let's put
Yeah, well, make sure you stay in touch, because if you're on our, if you signed up, for getting information from us, which is,
And your telephone.
our website is People's Park Historic District, just Google that, advocacy group, or email us, and we have the email address over here.
The end of October is a long ways away, and life gets
Yeah.
busy.
I'm
Yeah.
just gonna pass out these mostly because they have the website at the bottom.
So is the question over here.
Question?
Yeah,
And we'll try to do articles, and anybody who
Carol.
wants to write an article or assist us
Yeah.
with outreach and publicity.
Question?
years ago, I read an article about how the UC had blown about $4 or $5 billion in the Regents themselves had placed a lot of money in the subprime market, in the subprime meltdown. I guess they had been really exposed, and there were a bunch of sweetheart deals that they did. You know, you were saying that there's some of these business people that run the Regents. And they lost a lot of the university system's liquidity in the subprime
That's
meltdown.
very interesting.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering if their sort of push to monetize every little aspect of the UC, from a real estate, from a patent portfolio, from everything really, can be linked in, you know, like in the preponderance of evidence and all of this, linked to this, you know, that it's almost like against the, it's
Would be
almost
dynamic.
against the very basis of their charter.
Exactly, that's.
Yeah,
Against
well-
their charter.
well,
This
the
man,
pro-
PhD.
The problem that we have, that I think we try to point out, is that you have this Board of Regents, and it's said that the best way to get appointed to the Board of Regents is to donate to a governor's campaign.
Yeah.
So when Carol talks about democratizing the Regents, it's not a democratic, body, and it's not elected, and we, even though the charter is supposed to be public education, we've seen a tremendous decline. So part of it started, well over 40 years ago with Ronald Reagan and his cutbacks, and then once Reagan was president, the whole wave of austerity, from the federal level on down. So I think that's part of the problem. I can talk about one region in particular, and that's Richard Blum, who is the wife of Dianne Feinstein. And we ran into him because his real estate firm, at that time touted to be the world's largest, doing international real estate as well as real estate here, was hired by the Postal Service to sell post offices. And they tried to sell the Berkeley post office. And we actually, the city actually, in this case, stepped up and worked with a pro bono lawyer and
Pressure, yeah.
and another law firm, and we defeated them. The city was taken to court, and the suit was brought by the Department of Justice. We won. And it was on because of the historic nature of the post office within a historic district, which is the civic center of downtown Berkeley. It made a big difference to the judge. But Blum has been criticized because he's a finance guy. And it was discovered that the Regents were making investments in his financial firm or his ventures, whatever. When we contacted Dianne Feinstein to complain about her husband trying to sell our local post office, she claimed, "Oh, I have nothing to do with it. She's married to the guy. It's common law. she has definitely a lot to do with it. But that's the kind of stuff that goes on. And you're absolutely right about the Regents being criticized. I think it could be part of what you're talking about. They lost money, but they've also made some very bad investments. For example, their football stadium.
This is important, the
Yeah.
football stadium.
Yeah, football stadium.
Yeah.
It was multi-millions of dollars. And it was like what they did with the Coliseum, selling these box seats that didn't sell. And it put them in a big financial hole.
Leveraged generation.
So a part of it is making up for bad investments, probably on the Regents level, on the whole UC system level, but also on the local campus level. And that's what we're dealing with.
I guess I grew up in a New Deal kind of household where universities aren't supposed to make money, nor is housing supposed to make money, nor is healthcare supposed to be. These are not the places where you get rich. These are public goods. And I guess the way of thinking in my household and in the households that benefited so extraordinarily behind the New Deal see it in a completely different way. And this kind of thinking that it has to make money somehow it was amplified by Ronald Reagan, who thought that these elites are hanging around studying the hind leg of a grasshopper. Who does that and why? Like it's pointless. That hasn't really infected thinking culturally about something that should be free of that kind of pressure. That's what that is at least part of what a university should be for. A lot of beauty, a lot of art will never make money, never did make money, and may be valued long afterwards for reasons that weren't even seen at the time. But I'm really glad you brought that up, because I think that pressure is illustrative of what I think these regents tend to use to evaluate the way they see the university's decisions. And there now and then have been regents who kicked up a fuss about paying a $10 million salary to the football coach. Now and then you'll hear that kind of thing. And we've had scandals aplenty, but it is rare for people to bark back.
The heart of the matter. And what we all need, we all have little anecdotes, but nobody's pulled it together about what's going on behind the scenes with the financial monetization of a public university whose, like you brought it up, 1879 charter says it's for education. That's what the Regents' purpose is, education, but it's not anymore. And nobody has kind of pulled together the story of what corporations, what's the link of what and this, and I don't know if you're a reporter or a student or a PhD candidate or in business or whatever, but if there could be a group that could get together and get the facts and just expose it to the state, because even the word monetization on campus, that's just starting to be used, but it should have been used 10 years ago. And we need you.
Story,
Yeah.
The link between not just Jesse Arreguín,
Yeah.
but Mayor Bates.
Exactly.
before.
Bates before,
Right?
and Heyman, who took Bates on a,
Whole
yeah,
wave of
there's,
things that happened, and it crosses, and you saw how Jesse Arreguín just did a 180.
yeah.
Why is that?
That's
Okay,
right.
so the why and the connections, if it could be pulled together into a substantial, prove the point, it would be, we need it. We need it. So it's not about us, it's about maybe you guys.
Right,
'Cause-
I was hoping that there was like a deeper story that was understood. I know that there is that story.
There's bits and pieces.
Yeah.
And, Heyman's, each individual that's participated in building it up to this point, and I was just with some people yesterday who talked, I heard something today, but, there's some links here that really need to be exposed.